Esther's
Esther
earliest
was
memories were
chosen for
shaped
such a
by
time as
absence.
this. She
No
stepped
mother to
into
braid her hair, no father to protect her, just empty spaces where parents should have been. She was an orphan in a foreign land, living under Persian rule, far from the home her ancestors once knew. Her cousin Mordecai had taken her in, raising her as his own daughter. He was kind, protective, and careful. But kindness couldn't erase the ache of being alone in a world that didn't care about orphan Jewish girls. Esther learned early to be invisible, to keep her head down, to blend into the background and never draw attention. In Persia, being Jewish was dangerous. Being a woman was limiting. Being both meant living in the margins, hoping to survive unnoticed. She helped Mordecai in the marketplace, kept his home, and prepared meals. Her life was small, predictable, and safe. She never imagined anything else, never dreamed of palaces or power. I never thought her name would be remembered. She was just Esther, the girl with no parents, no status, no future worth mentioning. But heaven saw differently. While Esther lived quietly in the shadows, destiny was being prepared in places she couldn't see. Doors were opening, plans were shifting, and soon her invisible life would collide with a moment that would change everything. She just didn't know it yet. Mordecai had one rule that governed everything: hide your identity. Never tell anyone you're Jewish, he'd say, his voice low and urgent. Not your neighbors,
Under
not your
Persian
friends,
rule, I
no
must
one.
hide my Jewish
Esther
identity.
understood why.
One whisper
The
of the
Persian
truth
Empire
could mean
stretched
death.
across 127 provinces, and Jews were scattered throughout, exiles from a homeland they'd lost generations ago. They were tolerated but not trusted, accepted but not safe. One wrong word, one slip of the tongue, and everything could collapse. So Esther lived a double life. Publicly, she was just another Persian girl. Privately, she observed the traditions Mordecai taught her: prayers whispered in secret, Sabbath kept quietly, festivals celebrated behind closed doors. It felt like living half hidden, always watching, always careful. Sometimes she resented it. Why did she have to hide who she was? Why was her heritage something to fear instead of celebrating? But Mordecai's eyes would darken whenever she asked. The world isn't safe for us yet, he'd say. One day, maybe, but not now. So, Esther stayed silent, kept her identity locked away, wore her Persian mask so well that even she sometimes forgot
Queen
what lay
Vashti,
beneath.
you are removed from the throne.
She didn't know
This
that this
rejection is a
secret,
grave
this
injustice.
hidden identity, would one day become the hinge on which an entire nation's survival would turn. That what felt like weakness would become her greatest weapon. That hiding would prepare her for the moment she'd have to reveal everything. The news spread through Susa like wildfire. Queen Vashti had been banished. The king had summoned her to display her beauty before his drunken officials, and she'd refused. Publicly, defiantly. It was scandalous, shocking, and for Vashti, fatal. King Xerxes, humiliated and furious, had her removed from the throne. Just like that, the most powerful woman in the empire was gone, erased, replaced empty space and angry decrees. Mordecai heard the news in the marketplace and felt a chill. "This is dangerous," he muttered. Esther looked at him, confused. Why? She disobeyed the king. She stood up for herself, Mordecai corrected, and it cost her everything. But the king's advisors saw an opportunity. "You need a new queen, your majesty, someone who will honor you, obey you, respect you." The king, still wounded from Vashti's rejection, agreed. "Search the kingdom," he commanded. "Bring me the most beautiful young women. I'll choose a new queen from among them." A royal decree went out across all 127 provinces. Every eligible young woman was to be brought to the palace for consideration. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. Esther heard the announcement and felt her stomach drop. Beautiful young women. She'd spent her whole life trying to be invisible. And now, invisibility is no longer an option. The king's men were coming, and they were looking for girls exactly like her. The selection process was ruthless and massive. Thousands of young women were torn from their homes and brought to the palace in Susa. Some came willingly, dreaming of crowns and luxury. Others came in tears, dragged from families they'd never see again. It didn't matter. The king wanted options, and his officials delivered. Esther watched from a distance as soldiers moved through the city, rounding up candidates. Her heart raced. Maybe they'll overlook me, she thought desperately. Maybe I'm not beautiful enough. Maybe Esther. Mordecai's voice was quiet but firm. She turned, saw his face, and knew. They were coming for her too. "What do I do?" she whispered. "You go," he said simply, "and you trust God." "But listen to me," he gripped her shoulders. "If they take you, do not reveal you're Jewish, not to anyone. Do you understand?" She nodded, terrified. "And Esther?" His eyes softened. "Whatever happens in that palace, remember who you are. Not just your heritage, your character, your heart. Don't lose yourself." Within days, the soldiers arrived. They saw Esther and immediately selected her. She was given no choice, no time to prepare. Just a quick goodbye to Mordecai and a long walk toward the palace gates. As the massive doors closed behind her, Esther looked back once. Mordecai stood watching, his face a mixture of fear and faith.
I've got grown
And
up with
Esther
Mel, please
stepped
mind
into
my
a
shirt.
world she'd never imagined, one that would test everything she believed in herself. The palace was overwhelming. Marble floors stretched endlessly. Golden pillars reached toward painted ceilings. Servants moved silently through halls filled with luxury Esther had only heard about in stories. She was escorted to the women's quarters, a separate section of the palace where all the candidates were kept. A eunuch named Haggai was in charge. He walked through the rows of young women with a critical eye, assessing each one. When he reached Esther, he stopped. Something in her face, her eyes, her posture, her quiet dignity caught his attention. "What's your name?" "Esther." "Come with me." He led her to a better room, provided her with the finest oils and perfumes, assigned her 7 maids. The other women noticed immediately and jealousy sparked. "Why does she get special treatment?" they whispered. Esther didn't know. She hadn't asked for it, hadn't manipulated or flirted. She'd just been herself, quiet, respectful, and gracious. But Haggai saw something deeper. "You're different," he told her one day. "The others are trying so hard to impress. You're just present." Esther didn't understand, but she accepted the favor carefully, remembering Mordecai's "Don't lose yourself." 12 months of beauty treatments began, 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. It was excessive, exhausting, and surreal, but it was also preparation, not just for the king, for something far greater. Though Esther didn't know it yet, the favor was marking her. Not because of her beauty, she is alone, but because heaven had already chosen her for a purpose she couldn't yet see. Favor is a strange gift. Esther didn't seek it, didn't manipulate it, yet it followed her everywhere. Haggai gave her the best rooms. The servants preferred attending to her. Even the other candidates, though jealous, couldn't help but respect her. It wasn't an arrogance. Esther remained humble, kind, and grateful. She asked for advice instead of demanding privilege. She thanked servants instead of ignoring them. She observed rather than competing, and somehow that made her stand out more than any amount of beauty. Mordecai came to the palace gates daily, lingering nearby to hear news of her. He couldn't speak to her directly, but he'd send messages through trusted servants. "How is she?" "Favored, my lord. Highly favored." Mordecai closed his eyes in silent prayer. He recognized what was happening. This wasn't just human favor. This was a divine position. God was placing Esther exactly where she needed to be. But for what? The answer hasn't come yet. Inside the palace, Esther prepared for her night with the king. Each woman would be brought to him once. If he liked her, he'd call her again. If not, she'd be moved to a separate house, part of his harem, but never his queen. It was a brutal system, one night to determine your entire future. Most women dressed extravagantly, wore excessive jewelry, tried everything to stand out. When Esther's turn came, Haggai gave her advice. "Take only what I suggest. Trust me." She did. Simple elegance, natural beauty, no desperation, just grace. And when she walked into the king's chambers, everything changed. King Xerxes had seen hundreds of women, beautiful women, seductive women, women trying desperately to become queen. He was bored by most, impressed by none. Then Esther entered. She didn't perform, didn't flirt aggressively, didn't try to be someone she wasn't. She was simply present, graceful, respectful, and genuine. The king saw it immediately. This was different. She was different. They talked through the night, not about politics or power, but about life, dreams, and fears. Esther listened more than she spoke, asked questions, and laughed genuinely. For the first time in months, Xerxes felt seen, not as a king, but as a man. By morning, his decision was made. "Bring the royal crown," he commanded. His servants rushed to obey. Esther's heart pounded as they placed the crown on her head, draped her in royal robes, and declared her Queen of Persia. It happened so fast, too fast. One moment she was an orphan, the next, a queen. The palace erupted in celebration. A massive banquet was thrown in Esther's honor. Esther's banquet, they called it. Taxes were reduced across the empire. Gifts are distributed. The king was so pleased, he granted a holiday. But Esther felt strange. This crown was heavy. This title is dangerous. She thought of Vashti, the queen who'd been erased for one act of defiance. She thought of Mordecai's warning, "Don't reveal you're Jewish." And she realized this wasn't just an honor. This was a tightrope. One wrong step and she'd fall. But she wore a crown anyway, and waited to see why God had placed it on her head. Haman was a man built from pride and poisoned by ambition. He'd climbed the ranks of Persian power through manipulation, flattery, and ruthless cunning. And now King Xerxes has promoted him above all other nobles, second only to the king himself. A decree went out. Whenever Haman passes, everyone must bow. It was a test of loyalty, a display of power, and Haman loved it. He'd walk through the streets, watching people drop their knees, feeding his ego with every act of submission. But one man refused, Mordecai. Every day, Haman would pass the king's gate, and every day, Mordecai remained standing. The other officials hissed at him. "Bow, you'll get yourself killed." "I bow only to God," Mordecai replied, quietly. Word reached Haman. "Who is this man who refuses to honor me? His name is Mordecai. He's a Jew." Haman's face twisted with rage. A Jew. Of course, he despised them, their separateness, their stubbornness, their refusal to assimilate. And now one dared to disrespect him publicly? "Kill him," Haman's advisors suggested. "No," Haman said slowly, a dark smile spreading. "Killing one Jew isn't enough. I'll destroy them all." The idea took root like poison. Haman began plotting, not just Mordecai's death, but the annihilation of every Jew in the empire. Man, woman, child. He'd wipe them out of existence, and he'd use the king's authority to do it. Esther, safe in her palace chambers, had no idea, had no clue that the man now whispering in her husband's ear was planning genocide, that her secret identity was about to become a death sentence. Haman approached the king with a calculated precision. "Your Majesty, there's a certain group of people scattered throughout your empire. They don't obey your laws. They follow their own customs. They're a threat to your authority." Xerxes frowned. "Which people?" "Does it matter?" Haman said smoothly. "They're rebels, dangerous, and they need to be eliminated." He paused, then added the bait. "I'll personally pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury if you authorize their destruction." The king, distracted and trusting Haman's counsel, barely thought about it. "Keep the money. Do whatever you think is best." He removed his signet ring and handed it to Haman. With that ring, Haman could issue any decree as if it came from the king himself. Haman's smile was vicious. He immediately summoned scribes and dictated the order. On the 13th day of the 12th month, all Jews throughout the Persian Empire were to be killed. Their property was seized. Their families were destroyed. No exception. The decree was copied, sealed with the king's ring, and sent to every province. Couriers raced across the empire carrying death sentences. When the edict was posted in Susa, the city fell into confusion. Jews read the proclamation in horror. Their neighbors read it with uncertainty, some with dark anticipation. Mordecai heard the news and collapsed. He tore his clothes, covered himself in ashes, and wailed publicly at the king's gate. Across the empire, Jews mourned, fasted, wept. They had no army, no political power, no defense, just a date circled in blood, the day they'd all be murdered. And no one, it seemed, could stop it. Esther's maids came running, breathless and frightened. "Your Majesty, Mordecai is at the gate wearing sackcloth, wailing." Esther's heart dropped. Mordecai never acted rashly, never drew attention. If he was mourning publicly, something terrible would have
Grant me
happened.
the strength to endure.
She sent him clean
I place
clothes,
my trust in thee.
hoping he'd explain privately. He refused them. Instead, he sent back a message and a copy of the decree. Esther read it, and the world tilted. All Jews to be destroyed, killed, annihilated. Her hands shook. This couldn't be real. But it was. Haman's edict was law, irrevocable, unstoppable, and she was Jewish. If anyone discovered her identity, she'd be executed too, crown or no crown. Mordecai's message continued. "Do not think that because you're in the palace, you'll escape war. If you remain silent, deliverance will come from another source. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows? Perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this." The words struck her like lightning, for such a time as this. Her position wasn't random. Her favor wasn't accidental. God had placed her in the palace, given her the crown, positioned her beside the king for this moment, but the cost of speaking up was death. Persian law was clear. Anyone who approached the king without being summoned would be executed, unless the king extended his golden scepter. And Xerxes hadn't called for Esther in 30 days. If she went to him now, uninvited, he could have her killed on the spot. Esther stared at the message, paralyzed. Speak and risk death. Stay silent and guarantee it. What was she supposed to do? Fear is a thief. It steals clarity, courage, and faith, and Esther felt it wrapping around her throat like a noose. She paced her chambers, mind racing. If she approached the king uninvited, she could die. If she revealed her Jewish identity, she could die. If she said nothing, her people would die, and eventually, so would she. There was no safe option, no escape route, no way to win without risking everything. She thought about Vashti. One act of defiance, and the former queen had been erased. What made Esther think she'd fare any better? "I'm not brave," she whispered to herself. "I'm just a girl, an orphan. I didn't ask for this crown." But the crown was on her head, and the burden was on her shoulders. Mordecai's words echoed, "Who knows whether you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" She wanted to scream. I wanted to run, wanted someone else to carry this weight. But there was no one else, no other Jew in the palace, no other person with access to the king, just her. Esther closed her eyes, and for the first time in days she prayed, not a polite prayer, a desperate one. "God, I don't know what to do. I'm terrified. I'm weak. I'm unqualified." Silence. Then, slowly, a whisper in her spirit, "You're also chosen." Esther opened her eyes. Chosen. Not because she was strong, but because God had positioned her. Not because she was brave, but because heaven had prepared her. The decision was still terrifying. But now, it is also clear. She'd have to step into the fire and trust that God would meet her there. Esther didn't rush, didn't act impulsively. She knew that courage without strategy was just recklessness. So she sent a message back to Mordecai. "Go, gather all the Jews in Susa and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast as well. And then I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish." 3 days. No food, no water, just pray. It was ancient spiritual warfare, the kind that acknowledged, this battle isn't physical, it's spiritual, and it requires weapons the world can't see. Mordecai received the message and immediately mobilized the Jewish community. Word spread quickly. "Queen Esther is fasting for us. She's going to approach the king." Homes filled with prayer, voices lifted in desperate intercession. Old and young, rich and poor, everyone fasted. Meanwhile, in the palace, Esther gathered her maids. "We're not eating for 3 days. They stared at her, confused. "Why, Your Majesty?" "Because I need God to do what I cannot." She didn't explain it further, didn't tell them the plan, just led them into the most intense spiritual preparation of her life. 3 days of hunger, 3 days of weakness, 3 days of surrendering control and leaning completely in heaven. It wasn't about earning God's favor. It was about
Esther,
aligning her
you
heart
risk your
with
life.
His will.
My lord, I plead for my
About
people.
preparing herself to walk into danger
To
with
our
faith
continued
instead of fear.
prosperity.
And when the 3
to
days
our
ended,
alliance.
Esther would rise, not in her own strength, but in the
To our
power of a
continued
God who
prosperity.
specializes in impossible
And to our
rescues.
alliance.
The 3 days felt eternal. Esther's body weakened, her mouth dried, her stomach ached, but her spirit sharpened. In silence and hunger, distractions fell away, fear quieted, and clarity emerged. She prayed for prayers she'd never prayed before. Honest, raw, desperate. "God, I don't want to die, but I'd rather die obeying you than live hiding from you." She thought about her parents, gone too soon, Mordecai, who'd raised her with love and faith, about her people, scattered, vulnerable, facing annihilation. And she realized her life was never just about her. It was about legacy, purpose, divine assignments. On the 3rd day, as the fast ended, Esther made her final preparations. She bathed, dressed in her royal robes, the ones that signified she was queen, not just a woman. She looked at herself in the polished bronze mirror. The crown sat heavy on her head. Her face was pale from fasting, but her eyes burned with resolve. "If I perish, I perish," she whispered to her reflection. It wasn't a resignation. It was surrender. Total, complete surrender to whatever God required. Her maids watched in silent awe. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they felt the weight of it. This wasn't just a queen going to see her husband. This was a woman walking toward destiny or death. Esther took one last deep breath. Then she stepped out of her chambers and walked toward the throne room. Every step echoed into the marble halls. Every heartbeat pounded in her chest.
My
And every
people, I
prayer
have
from
considered your
thousands of
plea,
fasting Jews
and I
rose like
choose mercy.
incense
You are
around her.
forgiven.
The inner court of the king stretched before her, vast, intimidating, deadly. Guards lined up the walls, nobles stood at attention, and at the far end, elevated on a golden throne, sat King Xerxes. Esther stepped into the doorway. Immediately, every eye turned. Silence fell like a blade. The king looked up and froze. An uninvited woman stood in his court. His face was unreadable. Esther's knees nearly buckled. This is it. Life or death. Scepter or sword. Everything hung on his next move. Persian law was absolute. If he didn't extend the scepter, guards would seize her, drag her away, execute her for violating protocol. Esther didn't move. I didn't speak. Just stood, trembling, waiting. The silence stretched impossibly long. Then the king's face softened. His hand moved. Slowly, deliberately, he extended the golden scepter toward her. What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you. Relief flooded her body so intensely she nearly collapsed, but she steadied herself. This isn't over. She'd been granted access, but now she needed wisdom. If it pleases the king, she said carefully, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I've prepared. Xerxes smiled. Bring Haman at once, so we can do as Esther asks. Just like that, the first trap was set. Esther retreated, heart still pounding. She survived the approach, but the real battle was just the beginning. And she'd need every ounce of divine strategy to win it. Because Haman was coming to her banquet, and he had no idea he was walking into his own demise. The banquet was exquisite. Esther had spared no expense. Fine wine, delicate food, perfect music. The king reclined, pleased and relaxed. Haman sat nearby, swelling with pride at being personally invited by the queen. As the evening progressed, Xerxes turned to Esther. Now tell me, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Esther paused. She could feel the moment, but something held her back. Not fear. Timing. This isn't the moment yet. My petition and my request are this, she said carefully. If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases him, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to another banquet I will prepare. Then I will answer the king's question. Xerxes agreed immediately, enchanted by her. Haman left the banquet floating on arrogance. The queen invited only me and the king. Twice. I'm clearly her favorite. But as he passed the king's gate, he saw Mordecai, still standing, still refusing to bow. Rage exploded. All his joy evaporated. That Jew, he seethed. At home, he complained bitterly to his wife and friends. I have everything, wealth, power, the queen's favor, but it means nothing as long as Mordecai lives. His wife smiled darkly. Build some gallows 75 feet high. In the morning, ask the king to hang Mordecai on it. Then go enjoy the banquet. Haman's eyes lit up. Perfect. He immediately ordered the gallows to be constructed. By morning, it stood outside his house, a monument to his hatred, waiting for Mordecai's body. Haman went to bed and was satisfied, but he had no idea that while he slept, heaven was moving. That night, the king couldn't sleep. He tossed, turned, tried everything. Nothing worked. Finally, frustrated, he called for servants. Bring me the book of the Chronicles. Read to me. They brought the official records, dry, boring accounts of state affairs, perfect for inducing sleep. But as they read, one entry caught the king's attention. Mordecai the Jew uncovered a plot by 2 guards to assassinate King Xerxes. He reported it, and the traitors were executed. Xerxes sat up. What honor or recognition did Mordecai receive for this? The servants checked the records. Nothing, Your Majesty. He received nothing. The king frowned. A man had saved his life, and he'd never been rewarded? That was unacceptable. Just then, footsteps echoed in the outer court. Who's there? Xerxes called. Haman, Your Majesty. Perfect timing. Haman had come early, eager to request Mordecai's execution before the second banquet. But before he could speak, the king asked, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman's heart soared. Obviously, the king was talking about him. Who else would the king delight to honor? For the man the king delights to honor, Haman said eagerly, Have them bring a royal robe the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden. Let them robe the man and lead him on the horse through the city, proclaiming, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" Xerxes smiled. "Excellent. Go at once. Do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew." Haman's face went white. Haman stood frozen, sure he'd misheard. "Mordecai?" he choked out. "Yes, the man who sits at the king's gate. Hurry. Do everything you've suggested. Leave out nothing." Haman stumbled out of the palace, humiliation burning through him. The gallows he'd built for Mordecai stood 75 feet high, waiting, and now he had to honor the man he'd planned to hang. He found Mordecai at the gate, still in mourning clothes. "Come with me," Haman said through gritted teeth. He dressed Mordecai in royal robes, placed him on the king's horse, and led him through the streets of Susa, shouting the words that tasted like poison. "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." People stopped and stared. Jews wept with joy. Haman's allies watched in shock. And Mordecai, faithful, humble Mordecai, rode through the city vindicated. When it was over, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, and Haman rushed home, head covered in shame, grief pouring out. "I'm ruined," he told his wife and advisors. "Mordecai is a Jew. If he's rising and I'm falling." Before he could finish, the king's eunuchs arrived. "The queen's banquet is ready. The king is waiting." Haman had no choice. He went, dread filling his chest. Meanwhile, Esther prepared for the most dangerous moment of her life. She'd fasted, prayed, gained access, set the trap. Now she had to spring it, and everything depended on what happened next. The second banquet began. Wine flew. The conversation was light. But Esther's heart pounded. This is it, the moment she'd been preparing for. As the evening progressed, King Xerxes asked again, almost ritually now, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you." Esther took a breath. Then she spoke, not as a queen, but as a woman fighting for her life. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request." The king sat up, confused. "What? For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." Xerxes' faces darkened. "Who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther's voice was steady, but her finger trembled as she pointed. "An adversary and enemy, this vile Haman." Haman's face went white. The king exploded in fury and stormed out into the garden, trying to control his rage. Haman, realizing his life was over, threw himself at Esther's feet, begging for mercy. Just then, the king returned and saw Haman sprawl across the queen's couch. "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" Guards seized Haman instantly. One servant spoke up. "A gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it made for Mordecai." The king's voice was ice. "Hang him on it." Haman was dragged out, screaming, pleading, and cursing. The very gallows he'd built for Mordecai became his execution site. Poetic, perfect, divine. The man who'd plotted genocide was hanged on his own trap. The city of Susa erupted. Some cheered. Others stood in stunned silence. Haman, second only to the king, was dead. His 10 sons would follow. His house was seized. His legacy was erased. Mordecai was summoned to the palace. Esther revealed their relationship. He was her cousin, her guardian, and her spiritual father. The king, grateful and moved, gave Mordecai
Justice
Haman's
is
signet
released,
ring
Ham.
and elevated
You
him
have
to
fallen
Haman's
to your
former
own
position.
trap.
But the decree to destroy the Jews still stood. Persian law couldn't be revoked, even by the king. Esther fell at Xerxes' feet, weeping.
Justice is
"Please,
released, Ham.
stop the evil
You
plan
have
Haman
fallen to your own
devised.
trap.
Stop the destruction of my people." The king lifted her gently. "Write another decree in my name. Seal it with my ring. Whatever you write in the king's name cannot be revoked, but you can authorize the Jews to defend themselves." Mordecai and Esther immediately drafted a new edict. On the 13th day of the 12th month, Jews throughout the empire were authorized to defend themselves, to fight back, to protect their families. Couriers raced across the empire faster than before, carrying hope instead of death sentences. And when the Jews received the news, celebration exploded. Fasting turned out to be a feast. Mourning turned to dancing. Esther had done it. Against all odds, she saved her people. The 13th day of the 12th month arrived. The day that was supposed to be a massacre became a day of victory. Jews throughout the empire defended themselves. Their enemies, emboldened by Haman's original decree, attacked but found themselves facing organized, authorized resistance, and they lost. Badly. In Susa alone, 500 men who sought to harm the Jews were killed. Haman's 10 sons were executed. Across the empire, 75,000 enemies fell. But the Jews didn't plunder, didn't take revenge beyond defense. They hadn't become the monsters their enemies had been. The next day, they rested, and the day after that, they celebrated. Mordecai and Esther established a new festival, Purim, to commemorate the delivery. Every year, Jews would gather to remember the day sorrow turned to joy, the day mourning became dancing, the day of destruction became deliverable. Esther stood in the palace, looking out over Susa. She'd been an orphan, a hidden Jew. I am a terrifying girl. But God had positioned her perfectly, prepared for her thoroughly, used her powerfully. Her courage had unlocked a miracle. Her obedience had saved a nation. Her willingness to risk everything had secured her legacy forever. Mordecai was now second to the king, working for the good of his people. Esther remained queen, honored
A nation is
and
saved.
loved.
Victory
And the
erupts.
Jewish people,
Destiny is fulfilled.
they survived, thrived, continued, all because one woman believed she was chosen for such a time as this. And when the moment came, she didn't hide. She stepped forward, and heaven moved. Book of Esther 8:10.